I'm here with Pete Hoekstra. During his time in Congress, representing Michigan's 2nd Congressional District, Pete was chairman of the House Intelligence Committee. As chairman, he oversaw the modernization of the U.S. intelligence community to confront the post-9/11 terror threat. Pete Hoekstra, welcome.
It's good to be here. Thank you.
Let's get right into it. Are Republicans committing hara-kiri in not raising front and center the corruption of the Obama administration?
Well, absolutely. It's part of the responsibility of the opposition party. This time it's the House Republicans to hold this president accountable for the failings of his administration, whether it's corruption or the ineffectiveness of his policies. And we've seen a number of these, whether it's, fast and furious, whether it's Obamacare, whether it's what happened in Benghazi, his foreign policy. The Republicans need to hold this administration and his counterparts in Congress for the failings of their policies and their actions.
How should they hold them accountable?
Well, the best tool that they have in the House of Representatives is oversight hearings. Call the people in who are accountable for the failings of this administration, and they have to do it in a coordinated fashion. One of the frustrating things that I see right now is, when you've got this Bridgegate fiasco going on with Governor Christie. All right? Rahm Emanuel would do this in a heartbeat in Chicago. All right? But what happened with the Democrats in Trenton is, they brought the House and Senate committees together. They formed one united investigative committee. What are Republicans in the House of Representatives doing on Benghazi? They've got 5 different committees who are fighting over jurisdiction, and the end result is they're not being effective in getting down to the core issues in Benghazi.
Do you think Benghazi will have an effect on the presidential run, if there is one, by Hillary Clinton?
I think it should have. Clearly, foreign policy is a thing that the American people need to weigh when they're considering who's going to be their next president.
But aren't they focusing more right now on jobs and on Obamacare?
Well, that's what everybody says, all right? But you go back and you take a look at what the Democrats did to President Bush. In 2004, 5, and 6, they absolutely destroyed this president on his handling of foreign policy, his policies in Afghanistan, his policies in Iraq, and other things fighting this war on terror. They destroyed him in that area. They went into 2008 for the first time leading Republicans in the belief that Democrats could handle national security better than what Republicans could. They took one of our pillars away from us. And then they combined that with, the discussion and the debate on the economy, to win the election in 2008. Republicans in 2012, what did we do? We focused solely on the economy. We didn't try to get back and hold this president accountable for national security. Sure, there's going to be 5-10% of the people that are focused on national security. Don't give those voters up. Mm-hmm. This president has failed miserably on national security. Let's hold him accountable and let's point out his mistakes.
You talked about corruption a few minutes ago. Where do you see, in the Obama administration, that is, where do you see the largest amount of corruption?
Well, I think you see it almost every day. Corruption can be widely interpreted, but you see it, what happened with Fast and Furious. You see what he has done with the IRS and targeting of conservative groups. You see it each and every day. His war on coal and extra constitutional authorities where he's using the administration, where he's using the bureaucracy to go well beyond what Congress has given the bureaucracy the authority to do. That, from my standpoint, that's corruption. Republicans ought to be pointing it out. Americans should be absolutely furious with this because he's creating an imperial presidency. And what the president and Harry Reid and others need to recognize is that what's good for Obama will also be good for his successors, which someday may be a Republican president.
Given the fact that the Fourth Estate is in bed with Obama and his administration, what can we do to ensure that the truth comes out other than listen to Fox News and watch FoxNews.com?
Well, I think the good thing is the kind of things that you're doing.
But what do we do about the rest of the lamestream media?
Well, the problem is you can't. There's not a whole lot you can do. I mean, there's the lame street media. We have to use every mechanism possible to get our message out. I think there was a report out today that's talking about Obamacare, and what it says is that those of us that are opposed to Obamacare have been significantly more effective in getting our message out on the failings of Obamacare than those who support it, and they're doing it through social media. And the good thing is the Lame Street media, they're declining in influence. Social media and these other capabilities that are being developed through the net, they're gaining. So we need to become experts in using those tools, because at least that's a neutral playing field.
Pete, you've said that Republicans are going to capture the Senate and hold on to the House, and at the next national election capture the Oval Office. Why do you believe that?
Well, I think you got a number of things going on for the U.S. Senate. I come from the state of Michigan. We're going to win that Senate seat, and we haven't done that since 1992. So that's a huge opportunity, a big pickup. And if we're competitive in Michigan, there's a lot of other states that we're going to be a whole lot more competitive in. Why? Obamacare. Obamacare not only is bad for our health care system, it's bad for the economy. So we're going to see a 2014 where we're going to have a very slow economy, slow economic growth, high unemployment. You've got Democrats now coming out and saying, you know what, if people have to work less and there's a disincentive to work because of Obamacare, that's good. That goes against the very grain of who we are as Americans. And then I think we are going to point out the failings of this administration on national security. You put that all together in a package, and we can make 2014 look a lot like 2010.
Pete, you said that the administration refuses to use the term radical Islam and instead uses the euphemism violent extremism without identifying the identity of those who propagate violent extremism. How can we stop this charade and allow the American public to know the full extent of the threat of radical Islam in the United States?
Well, we've made a lot of progress just getting them to talk about extremists. Remember when they started, they wouldn't use the word terrorism and they wanted to use the word man-made disasters. We still have the problem with Fort Hood, where they're calling that workplace violence rather than an act of terrorism. It's one of the things that we do at the Investigative Project on Terrorism, is really highlight who the enemy is, that radical jihadists, that the radical extremists, and Dianne Feinstein even came along on this. It wasn't long ago on
Sunday. You want to name some names that they that the administration refuses to name?
Well, I mean, obviously they don't want it. They now won't talk about al-Qaeda in the broad term. They now talk about core al-Qaeda. This came out after Benghazi that said al-Qaeda's on the run. They won't use the term caliphate. They refuse to talk about Sharia law. They refuse to, and then they talk about these other groups as being the B team, the JV for al-Qaeda, as they've overrun an embassy after they've overrun a consulate in an annex and killed Americans. It is, and the scary thing to me is that I think they actually believe that they're winning this war on terrorism.
That's amazing.
It is amazing.
Now, you said the Department of Justice and the FBI purges massive amounts of material, from PowerPoints to redaction of memos, removal of hundreds of books on militant Islam, and even the blacklist of those experts on radical Islam that are considered to be offensive to radical Islam.
Yeah, I mean, one of the person who founded the Investigative Project on Terrorism, Steve Emerson, for years would go.
Who was supposed to be here today?
He was supposed to be here.
Except he's having back surgery.
He's having back surgery, so I'm a fill-in and a stand-in.
What a great fill-in you are.
Well, thank you. But Steve used to go in and brief FBI agents and other domestic and international security people about his background and understanding of what the threat was, what you had to look for, how you could identify it, and these types of things. He's now become an uninvited to come and brief folks.
He's blacklisted.
He's blacklisted, and as are others, because they spoke.
Who else is blacklisted?
I'm not sure who all the other folks are, but
people like.
Well, I think you got me in a blank moment. But the folks that used to come in and brief the FBI about these threats, who had studied these threats, are no longer welcome.
Wow, that's pretty.
They want to cleanse this. They want to make the FBI, politically correct. I think Eric Holder was here in New York, I think 2-3 weeks ago. Met with the mayor, and the mayor leaked out that said that after the meeting, he said the Attorney General has confided in me that we're not going to use religious profiling as we move forward into the future. And it's kind of like radical jihadist, radical Muslim, it sounds politically correct and all of these types of things, but it's just going to make it that much harder for us to identify who and where the threats are coming from.
Wow. Your friend Congressman Frank Wolf from Virginia, who's retiring.
Yes, Frank is a good friend.
He has called for a special committee to be created to investigate Benghazi. Why hasn't Congress acted on that?
It's a huge frustration. I know it's a huge frustration to Frank. This is a guy that's gotten 183 signatures.
So why hasn't Congress acted on it?
Speaker will not bring it up for a vote. The Speaker has delegated the responsibility of the 5 various committees, Intelligence, DOD, Foreign Affairs, House Oversight, to carry out their narrow focus.
Pete, what's your belief what's the reason that you think that the Speaker won't do it?
I think the Speaker has 5 committee chairmen who all want to be part of this investigation, and none of them are willing to give it up to a select committee that would really focus on it and do a deep dive into it.
And that's the only reason?
Well, I mean, there's other suspicions out there, but I got to believe, at least right now, that's the best explanation that I can give.
Secretary Kerry gave a speech on the Middle East in Munich about a week ago. He threatened Israel with the onslaught of divestment and delegitimization if Israel didn't agree to a framework for the so-called peace negotiations between Israel and Palestinians. What will it take to convince the American Jewish community that this administration's really put a dagger at Israel's throat?
It's one of the huge. That's another huge question that's out there. You take a look at what this administration has done to Israel. It's not only, and Secretary Kerry, in all fairness, wouldn't say, "I threatened Israel." He just said, that could happen. But basically providing our European allies with the cover to impose a blockade or sanctions if Israel doesn't reach an agreement, and he'll come back and say, "I told you so." But you take a look when we embraced the Muslim Brotherhood in Egypt. That was a dagger, to the southern border of Israel, because that's now Al-Qaeda established itself in the Sinai. They're still there. That's a threat. What's going on with Iran? Those have all been daggers. And, for much of the Jewish community, it's kind of like, well, if they're in there and they're somewhat supportive of Israel, we'll support them for re-election. In reality, I hope they go back and they reassess some of these positions because Israel's at much greater risk today than what it's been in a long time.
Obamacare is going to be an issue, no question, this year in this year's elections. Do you think it's going to be one in 2016?
Absolutely. It's going to be...
Then how do you get foreign policy to rise up to be a major issue?
Again, I'm not saying foreign policy is going to be a major issue. We need to address foreign policy and put it and hold this administration accountable for their failures in foreign policy for the 10 to 15% of the voters who pay attention to foreign policy. If we can increase that to 18 to 20%, great. But there are certain voters who are going to be very focused on the economy. There are certain voters that are focused on social issues and those types of things. And then there is also a group of voters that are focused on foreign policy. In 2009 and 2012, in 2008 and 2012, we didn't speak to those voters.
We made a lot of mistakes in 2012, didn't we?
We made a lot of mistakes in 2012.
What were the 5 biggest ones, in your opinion?
Well, I think walking away from Benghazi. Benghazi is really.
That's number 1.
It's kind of the capstone. I mean, it was the tipping point that it would have enabled us to say this president's foreign policy has no clothes. There's no substance to it.
What would be number 2?
We spent way too much time fighting each other rather than focusing on the failures of this administration. The third would be focusing just on foreign policy. Those would be 3 things that...
2 more? Quickly?
We didn't spend enough time educating and developing our candidates. We had some candidates that made some basic errors that if they would have gotten some more additional training or coaching or whatever, perhaps would not have made those kinds of mistakes.
And the last one of the big 5?
No, I mean, we did a lot of things where we raised a lot of money and all that, but the bottom line is we thought money would win, messaging wins.
If President Obama called you up today and said, Pete, you're the former chairman of the Intelligence Committee, give me one piece of advice, what would that be?
Mr. President, it's time to reset your foreign policy in terms of how you're dealing with al-Qaeda. You tried to reset it in 2009. It's failed miserably. You've got to go back. You've got to recognize the enemy. You've got to identify the enemy. And you've got to confront, contain, and put in place a strategy that ultimately is going to defeat this enemy, because al-Qaeda is stronger today than it was in 2001 when we were attacked. That's not Pete Hoekstra speaking. That's the chairwoman of the Senate Intelligence Committee, and that's the chairman of the House Intelligence Committee articulating and saying this al-Qaeda is back and we need to confront them.
Pete Hoekstra, thank you so much for being here.
Well, thanks, and thanks for all that you're doing.
It's great to have a former chairman of the House Intelligence Committee. Come back again soon.
We'd love it. Thank you.